So, welcome to week four's walkthrough. This week we have two recap games to walk through. So, we will start with Unit 2, Lecture 1's recap game, and we'll move to Unit 2, Lecture 2's recap game. And as always, I highly recommend that you try these out yourself prior to coming and watching the walkthrough so you can sort of test your own knowledge. But with that, we'll get started. So the first question is looking for you to identify what would be an example of an official statistic. If you recall back in this lecture, we talked about different sources of data that we sort of give us an idea of the nature and extent of crime. When we're talking about official statistics, we're talking about data that comes from the police, as in the case of the UCR, as well as data from the courts. Both of those would be examples of official data. Other official data forms could come from corrections as well. So it could come from prisons even. So the UCR is arrest data from police, and then you also have data from courts on sort of like sentencing and things like that would be an official statistic. A victimization survey is victimization data, and self-report survey is self-report data. Second question is dealing with some of those limitations of our data sources. It's specifically focused on the NCVS in this case. So you have to identify which one is not a limitation of the NCVS. And so all of these are limitations aside from the green box, that it relies heavily on honesty and reporting of their own engagement in crime. If you're reporting on your own engagement in crime, that would be a self-report survey. NCVS is a victimization survey with several known limitations. Those are on the other options, such as only surveys people 12 and older. Many crime victims still don't report their victimizations even to the NCVS, let alone to arrests. We know that's also a limitation of arrest data. And that some of the most highly victimized populations aren't sampled because the NCVS is a household survey. So it misses people who are incarcerated, misses people who are homeless. And we know these to be groups that are exposed to a high degree of victimization. Next question is asking about one of those theories of victimization, specifically routine activities theory, and it's trying to get at sort of what are the three factors that must come together, both time and place, to result in a crime occurring. And so for routine activities theory, you need a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian for a crime to occur. Things about victim precipitation deal with victim precipitation theories, in which we sort of talk about the idea that victims play a role in their own victimization. But for routine activities theory, the three factors are having someone, a motivated offender, you have a suitable target, as well as the absence of a capable guardian. Finally, the last question in this recap is asking sort of for you to give a sense of who is committing crimes. So we know overall criminal victimization is on the decline. One of the other key points is about who's committing the crime. Is it somebody that we know, or is it somebody that is a stranger? And the majority of crimes are in fact committed by someone that is known to the victim, right? It's unlikely that we're going to be a victim of a crime to somebody we have no idea or no sort of connection to. The majority of crime involves someone that you know and not a stranger to yourself. So that's it for Unit 1 recap. And then take a quick pause here. Make sure you've done Unit 2, Lecture 2's recap, and then come back for that lecture recap. It's going to come back in just a couple seconds. All right, so let's shift gears now and get into Unit 2, Lecture 2's walkthrough. So the first question is asking you to differentiate between mal and se and mal-prohibited offenses. So mal and se are offenses that we consider to be sort of evil or bad in nature. Mal-prohibited offenses are offenses that we say are bad because we sort of deem them as bad. In the case of a crime like rape, it's commonly agreed to be a mala in se offense, bad or evil in nature. It's not sort of prohibited just because we say it's bad. Malaprohibitic type offenses are typically things like drug-based offenses, where maybe there's nothing inherently evil about engaging and using drugs, but we as a society deem them to be dangerous enough to sort of prohibit their use. Next question deals with issues of jurisdiction, which we talk about these different levels of law. So in this scenario, person is from Detroit, Michigan, but commits a crime in New York. So under this, what jurisdiction of laws would they be facing if they commit the crime in New York? So we're always under the jurisdiction of federal law. In this case, it's where the crime is committed, so they're under New York and New York City laws. Michigan state laws or Detroit city laws wouldn't have any jurisdiction because that's just sort of the residence of the offender, not where the crime took place. With issues of jurisdiction, it's always about where the crime actually takes place. Next question is asking you to differentiate between the different limits of the law. And this one is asking which one states that laws must say what they mean and mean what they say. In this case, this is sort of the definition of void for vagueness. The laws must be written in a way that they're easily understandable and only apply to what they say they will apply to. So it's really important when you think about this concept of limits of the laws that you can understand and differentiate between each of these different limits of the law that were sort of discussed within lecture. It's really easy for me to create questions for unit quizzes based upon these because there's so many different limits of the law, and I can create scenarios for each one. So definitely sort of pay attention to these limits of the law. So the next question deals with the two elements of a crime, actus reus and mens reus. When we're talking about intent specifically, we're talking about mens rea. Actus reus is the sort of behavior, the action of the offender that is the crime. Mens rea is the intent behind the crime. And the final question deals with sort of criminal defenses. We're talking about the criminal law. One of those is the victim can consent or condone to a criminal offense. And this may be an acceptable offense in most crimes, but in the crime of murder, a victim cannot consent or condone their own murder. It's one of the exceptions to the rule. So with that, that sort of wraps up this week's recap, as well as Unit 2 in its entirety. So give yourself some practice in playing through these quizzes and make sure you sort of understand the sort of concepts behind these. Don't focus just on the questions asked within this, but sort of focus on the concepts that were discussed in each of these quizzes, and that'll give you a good idea of some of the things that you should be preparing for your Unit 2 quiz.